Hey, you made it to the last week, and now we're going to talk about senses mostly, um, general senses and special senses. Well, general senses are different than special senses because their receptors tend to be spread over a large area, as opposed to special senses that only have the receptors in specific areas. So, for example, the eye, you don't see out of your elbow, right? Just your eyes, but we can feel touch and pain and hot and cold in many places on the body. So, how we classify receptors can be done by their function or their response to a stimulus. And some of these things we talked about in the skin way back when we were talking about like these. Some of the most simple receptors are these free nerve endings, and they are just the dendrites of sensory neurons extending uh, like a like through the tissue. And here's an example of in the skin. Um, they are just branching out, inserting themselves between cells, and they are typically stimulated by chemicals, pressure, temperature, or trauma. So they can relate several different kinds of information, but they are definitely the most simple. Another kind of receptor we have is a nociceptor, and these are specifically for pain. Now, they are free nerve endings, but they have large receptive fields and broad sensitivity, and they don't adapt quickly. Their axons for nociceptors are of two types. They're either type A fibers or type C fibers. Now, type A fibers are myelinated, okay? And type C fibers are unmyelinated. And if you recall from our study of the neuron, myelinated axons are faster and unmyelinated axons are slower in their transduction of signal. So it should make sense that type A fibers are associated with fast pain. Those are myelinated fibers. They can transmit very fast. And this is what we call like prickling pain, okay? So these are usually like damaging pain, and we want to get that information to the brain quickly so we can have some kind of response and stop before we have too much damage. And we can usually really localize the stimulus. So like if you know, get a paper cut as you're sliding your finger down a piece of paper, okay, you know which finger it is, right? It's not a guess on which finger you cut. Type C fibers, the unmyelinated fibers, are associated with slow pain. And this is the kind of pain that's a burning and aching, like a like a sprained ankle after a few days. That pain that you have is slow pain. Okay, when you first sprain it, ow, that's fast pain. Okay, but aching in general. And that pain that's identified over a large area is slow pain on type C fibers. Thermoreceptors, they are temperature receptors. Should make sense with their name, right? We find them in the dermis, they're in the skeletal muscles, in the liver, and in the hypothalamus. So we monitor temperature in several areas, and your brain puts all that together to know whether or not we need to change and have some kind of response in order to warm us up or cool us down. There's really no structural difference between warm and cold thermoreceptors, except we have a lot more cold receptors than we do warm receptors. And maybe that's why a lot of people, oh, I don't like cold, and they move on down to Florida. Then we have chemoreceptors, and these respond to water-soluble and lipid-soluble substances dissolved in body fluids. That's code for they have to be wet to work, okay? And whatever substance you are trying to sense has to be able to dissolve in the fluid that is surrounding those chemoreceptors. So chemoreceptors have to be wet to work. Mechanoreceptors, okay, these respond to some kind of squish, a pull, twist or something, some kind of distortion of their plasma membranes. So typically they have gated channels that are together, and when we distort the plasma membrane, you're opening up the gate and allowing ions to flow, and that's what depolarizes them. Our mechanoreceptors, we can break them into several different categories. We have proprioceptors. These are the ones that are going to give you information about your body's limb positions in space and the position of joints. This is for planning in your brain. You know, is my arm already flexed? Or where am I starting from in order to plan a movement? Baroreceptors, think barometer. Okay, baroreceptors are pressure receptors. We have baroreceptors, for example, in blood vessels. So when your blood vessels start to stretch too much because of the pressure in there, then your body's going to respond by trying to lower the pressure. We also have tactile receptors. Okay, we talked about some of these like Pacinian corpuscles and Ruffini corpuscles, or better known as lamellated corpuscles and bulbous corpuscles in the skin, and those distortions of those plasma membranes are going to give you information about deep touch, pressure, and vibration. All right, so let's see. Oh, I just went through all those. Okay. So know your receptors. Okay, so we have nociceptors, pain, thermoreceptors, temperature, mechanoreceptors, they need some kind of distortion, and chemoreceptors. And then there's subtypes underneath. All right, real quick. Okay. Receptors can also be categorized by the nature of their response to stimulation. Well, tonic receptors are slow to adapt, and they're also always active. Okay, so the frequency of how they fire, they're always active, so they're always firing. Changing the frequency gives the brain information about the presence or absence of a stimulus. So here in this graph, you can see that when everything is normal at homeostatic levels, okay, this receptor is firing every so often. And when some kind of stimulus is applied, it's going to fire faster, 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 take the stimulus away, and it goes back to its regular spacing of firing. Phasic receptors, though, these are fast adapting, and they're normally inactive, meaning that they don't fire at all unless they get a stimulus. Okay? They're active for a short time when a change occurs in what they are monitoring. So, for example, here, this one, when everything is status quo, we're not getting any kind of information. And then when things change, okay, then we send the information to the brain saying, hey, a stimulus has turned on. And then nothing happens until now we change again and the stimulus is turned off. Okay, and it tells the brain that. Okay, so for example, when you're standing beside a swimming pool, right, and you jump in, you're like, whoa, cold, right? Your body has sent the message, whoa, something has changed. The temperature has changed. But then you get used to it, right? And as you get used to it, then those don't fire anymore. When you get out of the pool and a breeze comes by, blows on you, and you're cold again, okay, now we're going to signal, oh, okay, something has changed again. So we talked about adapting, right? They adapt. Well, where and how they adapt is also another way to categorize them. We have peripheral adaptation. Okay, so here now the level of sensitivity to the stimulus changes. We have the receptor activity changes. The receptor first responds strongly, and then the activity declines. Okay, so temperature. There we go. We jumped in, right? We got the message, it's cold. And then it's going to quit firing. It's going to basically say, yeah, it's still cold in here. It's still cold. It's still cold. But your brain doesn't need to know that. It only wants to know the change in the stimulus. We also have central adaptation. It happens in the central nervous system, and it inhibits nuclei along a sensory pathway. What that means is the brain is basically like, okay, I get it. I've heard this song before, and let me know when things change again. Here, a smell, right? You put on some perfume, and you're, it smells good, right? But after a while, you're like, I don't smell it anymore. Okay, and it's not that the perfume's not smelling, because when you walk up to someone, they might go, oh, you smell good today. And now they smell it, but you don't smell it. They smell it because it's a new stimulus, right? Your brain has centrally adapted to that smell. All right, so that is a little bit about receptors. I'll see you in the next video.